Hello, civilized people. Have you ever heard of a modern politician being called a right wing extremist? Have you ever heard of a certain Austrian painter being called a right wing extremist? Have you ever heard of people that like to live in the woods and be left alone being called right wing extremists? What if I told you that this was not only wrong, but so bafflingly stupid that I can only attribute it to the failure of the higher education system? The true hard right is the most romanticized type of government of all time, the government of Middle Earth, of Arrakis, and of virtually every Disney animated movie of all time. The form of governments which communism, fascism, National Socialism, normal socialism, liberal democracy, and republicanism all emerged out of. So put on your royal vestments, hang your heraldry high, and trade your daughter to a stranger to strengthen your alliance with the French. Because today, on the Goths in Rome podcast, we are going to take a good hard look at the true hard right. So, Colton, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty all right, Robert. How about you?
Not bad. I noticed you snickering at the intro a little bit. That
Aligning with the French. Classic rookie mistake.
it is. You never align with the French.
Nah.
So, monarchy. It was a thing. Uh, so whenever I say the word monarchy, what comes in mind for you?
Well, my first, thoughts that come to mind are all of the dramatizations, of people having to like bow and address everyone with proper, etiquette and stuff like that. And then after that comes, actual historical things. But it's always like that scene of like a royal court first in my mind. What about you?
Honestly, I don't know. You know my fascination with the migratory period
Hmm.
and the building of nations. Then, for those of you who don't know, the migratory period was that time where Rome was kind of going to shit, and all of the Germans decided to come and pay them a visit. Specifically, the Goths, but there were a lot of other guests. Uh, it was a whole family affair. But in the rise from that, and I guess just because of my historical interest, that's what comes to mind. But I would suspect for a lot of people, uh, it would be quite possibly some of the Arthurian legends,
Hmm. I
which
can see that.
humorously enough were also legends during a lot of the period of time when monarchy was still a thing. But we'll get to some of the romantic romantic romanticization, ro- romancing. We're going to stick with that. But Colton,
Yes.
why do people forget that governments existed both during and before World War I?
I think it's because that was just a great reshaping of society, really. That was the end of most Central European monarchies, right?
It was. It was. But people these days, most of the West, you have something resembling a liberal democracy.
Mhm.
And, you know, it seems like people have forgot what they came from.
Well, there's still a
I
cou
mean,
couple countries around doing it the old way.
and don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of monarchies in Europe. Uh, but those monarchies lack the influence they once had.
Mhm.
But that's always been troubling to me. I mean, World War I was, I pretty much guarantee, you go out and ask people why World War I happened, and they're going to say, oh, Archduke Ferdinand, and then they completely forget the fact that it was like three cousins having an argument,
Yeah.
and there was also a trade war that had been, just building up for what, a century.
I think one of the things that really highlights that is if people look at pictures of the monarchs at the time. I think it was the King of England and the Emperor of Russia. They were like first cousins, right? And they could be almost twins of each other.
Yes, Russia, Germany, and Britain all had monarchs that were like first cousins.
I think they were
They
all
were all
descended
very,
from Queen Victoria, right?
they were all descended from Queen Victoria. They were relatives of Queen Victoria. I don't know exactly offhand.
I think. I mean, this is us just talking out of our ass here. I think um, the leader of Germany was like a nephew or like right something like that, and then obviously the English were direct descendants, and then I think also the Russians were direct descendants.
Yeah,
That would make
it's
sense with how they looked, at least.
yeah, like there was no mistaking them. They were very close relatives. You could, if you were having a movie with all three of them, you could pretty much cast the same actor.
Yeah, you got to get the German king's mustache right though. That's vital.
Vital, it is. But monarchy is obviously, when people think of it, they think, a king or a queen, but there are more than just, what you think of as a Western monarchy that really falls into that category. And on that end, I mean, I think shogunate would count.
Yeah, the military leaders in Japan in the
Yep.
medieval times,
Well, Japan's medieval times, lasted a little bit longer than most.
and they ended quite a bit faster than most too.
They ended very quickly. You know, gunpowder does that.
Hmm.
Uh, I would also throw in theocracies. You don't really have too much for that these days. Um, like the Vatican is really the one that people think of. You have cardinals who are appointed, and then those cardinals elect a pope. It doesn't have the same, dynastic structure,
Hmm.
but still has, the same divine mandate side of things.
In a
That
way,
like
one of
in
them's much
the
more
one
divine mandate than the other.
the, the yes, but all of these systems do tend to have, like a concept of divine mandate to them.
Hmm.
And then you have the bastard child of both theocracy and monarchy, which, what is it, Ikya? I know I'm butchering that. What is it? It's the system of Islamic monarchy where the head of state can also be the head of religion,
Yeah,
where you're not only the leader of man,
you're also a
you're
spiritual leader.
you're also a spiritual leader. So you control you control the laws, and you control who goes to heaven.
I
So
wouldn't say like that. I'd say it's more just you control you know, the the temple building, and you can put people in charge, and basically it's like free propaganda, right?
kind of, to an extent.
All of the
Uh
charities done in your name since you own the place.
yep. Now, one thing that you know, some people may be asking themselves if they know much about, you know, these various large countries around the world during I guess what we would call the feudal age of Europe. They might have noticed that we do not have Chinese imperialism on this list.
Hmm.
And yes, certainly the emperorship of China was a hereditary title. Certainly. Was there a sense of, was there a certain, mandate of heaven to that? Oh, absolutely. But at the same point in time, uh, humorously, China was kind of a bureaucracy where, the emperor's role was very, very limited. And most governance was actually done by just people that, had taken tests to see what they were knowledgeable about. And then, you would establish a bureaucracy. So you would have, an agricultural minister assigned to this region, a financial minister assigned to this region that were just well educated people. So it lacked the subordinate structure in a lot of ways of traditional monarchies. So could it potentially be lumped into this? Yes, but for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about today, it is just so vastly different that all those Chinese emperors can, just keep enjoying their thousand concubines and tea parties wherever they are these days. And wearing lots of yellow. Lots of yellow.
Yellow
Actually,
robes
did
seem comfy.
well, yes. In the same way that purple was the royal color in Europe, yellow was the royal color in China.
I didn't know that.
Yep, you could tell somebody's position within the Chinese imperial palace based upon how much yellow clothing they were wearing and whether the dishes they were served in had yellow on them.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, monarchy appears in a lot of fictional works. And, you know, it's a damn shame because most of the well known works that include it tend to do it wrong.
Hmm. Definitely.
And, you know, I'm going to wag my finger at some people.
All right.
And I am sorry. I love Tolkien as much as anybody. But if Gondor does not have a king, they have a regent, not a steward.
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I guess.
and for those who have read the books, there would be no way that Imrahil is a prince. He would just given the time that had passed, there would be he would not be close enough related to any sitting ruler of Gondor to where he would carry the title prince. Unless, for some reason, all of Gondor was, magically just decided to become the Holy Roman Empire, and all of the, these dukes with an inordinate amount of land had proclaimed themselves, grand dukes over principalities, and he was calling himself that. So no, like, eh, admittedly, this is, nitpicking, but it is a case where, you see even people that are very, very well educated, which certainly Professor Tolkien was, you see it romanticized and things thrown. The next one, and probably the worst, is Frank Herbert. Now, I don't think you've read Dune,
No, I've not.
or I doubt you've seen the movies then.
Mm-mm.
Well, you have an emperor, and you have, certain houses that report to them, and they have these noble titles. And I hate to tell you, to anybody who likes those books, which I admit I do, but a baron, which is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen and a Duke, uh, which is Duke Atreides, are not even on the same wavelength of political influence. These are vastly different animals. Like, it's not like just the Duke is the boss of a baron, but a Duke can be the baron's boss's boss. Like, these are vastly different levels of political influence. So, I don't know too much of the backstory there, but I always found that one to be a bit humorous that those were compared. And the next is, well, George R. R. Martin, I'm kind of going to give a pass, as we'll get to later. If you rule multiple kingdoms, what is it? That's about seven kingdoms in, what is it, Game of Thrones? Then you could be, a king and never proclaim yourself an emperor. But generally, if you're ruling over seven kingdoms, you've got a big enough pair of cojones to where, you're just going to say, screw it. I'm an emperor now. But credit where it is due. There are some great works that actually do get the monarchy right. I speak, of course, of fairy tales, presumably because most of these were written at a time period when, monarchy was, still the order of business. So at least somebody got it right, Colton.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a little bit, important to know what was going on in your general society back then.
It would be kind of important. As you know, there were a lot of, well, I mean, there were a lot of titles at the time, if you look across Europe, but they really boil down to just a few.
Hmm.
And I think we should go into these. And at least as ones with any real political clout, one of the lowest of these is going to be a baron. And, you know, if you go and you see a castle somewhere or a military fortification, if a person ruled over that and the surrounding area, and that was all they controlled, that would generally be a baron. Um, they largely served a military function in the form of, tax collection. Frequently, where presumably most everybody listening to this well, understands English. If you don't understand English, thank you, I guess. I'm not sure why you're listening, but I appreciate it. But if in a lot of the castles for a baron would not have been stone, they would have been, a wooden Motte and Bailey structure. Thank you, Normans. But these were essentially a means of, taking a small group of soldiers in, enforcing local law, and collecting taxes. And these were, I mean, you certainly had some influential barons, but by and large, they were just a tool of counts. You,
Question:
what you got?
would their responsibilities also include levying freemen in times of war?
Of course.
Okay.
Um, yes, during this time period, you would not have following the collapse of Rome. You didn't really see too many standing professional armies. Growing food was kind of important, so you didn't really want all of your peasants wearing armor and stabbing people all the time. Sometimes you need to have them trade in those swords for plows and scythes, and provided they don't get torches and pitchforks. Everything's going well. Uh, Next up from that would be counts. And, like Dracula and, the Count on Sesame Street. Believe it or not, they're not all vampires or have, you know, rather dry French literature written about them. But a count, believe it or not, ruled a county. Now, that's actually a holdover even in the United States from that subdivision of territories. Um, now a count, for example, for people in the U.S., I don't know the subdivisions of territory in some other nations, but whatever county you are living in, the count would be the person that oversees that county. They are the chief executive for that county. And that count may control more than one county. But, you know, I don't think there's much more to say on counts. Dukes are sort of where it gets interesting.
Let's move on then.
Now could counts may or may not have, a baron underneath them. But, you know, a count would not have any formal title really other than a baron underneath them. Next up are dukes, and that's where you're starting to look at some very real power. Because a duke controls multiple counties. Some of those he may rule himself. A duke may also be a count and rule as a count in multiple counties, while also having other counts rule counties that are underneath his duchy. By this point, you're looking at someone who can actually put together an army. Dukes were fairly significant figures. To give you some context of the kind of army and the kind of political influence that a duke could wield, William the Bastard, better known as Colton.
William the Conqueror.
Yes. Um, as a duke, he had the political influence enough to, make an ally of the Frisians and then be like, hey, I'm going to go conquer Britain. I want to go conquer England. And despite all of the setbacks, it took him like a year to cross the channel. He even tried once, and then all the ships wrecked and they had to come back. But there were there were dukes that were more powerful than kings just because of the territory they control. Um, the like notable dukes over the course of the years, obviously, the Duke of Normandy. In fact, the royal family of Britain still has the Duchy of Normandy as one of their titles, even though they didn't. The heraldry of England, the heraldry of the royal family, the heraldry of England includes the heraldry of Normandy. But certainly, so Normandy was a big one. The Duchy of York was another one, and the Duchy of Anjou, which for any Plantagenet fans out there. I mean, I guess technically there's still one of those left. There is still one living Plantagenet in Australia, of all places. They actually did the The BBC did something about it. How the heir to the final Plantagenet king was deemed to be a bastard, or
Mhm.
not deemed to actually be the son of the former Plantagenet king. So they thought it was like, a child of adultery.
Yeah.
But then, they went on, their family wound up going to Australia years later. And yeah, so they have a different name, but there is one living Plantagenet left, and technically he has two daughters.
Why is that a technicality?
Well, I'm not sure if they can inherit, but I'm not sure how well, it would go for Plantagenets having a female heir, given the rules of their time.
Mhm.
And then after dukes, you have kings. So a king, may or may not even have dukes in their realm. But if you have a large enough nation with a high enough population, you are going to have to delegate out responsibilities. And this is how that was handled. And each of these titles are hereditary. Now, emperor is always the fun one. Emperor is always fun because, quite literally, the only reason anybody in Europe really went around calling themselves an emperor was because they really kind of were just wanting to, I guess, LARP at the fact that they were Romans, that they had, attained the same greatness,
Cosplaying as Caesar.
essentially. And, Holy Roman Empire, debatably holy, definitely not Roman.
Some weird
Uh,
bastardization of empire.
Very weird bastardization of empire. And it was all, but emperors, the only difference would be that you would have the equivalent of a king as a subject, which the Holy Roman Empire ultimately did. Um, you had, what is it, the Grand Duchy of Saxony, which the head of that was essentially a king. What was it?
Would the
Saxony,
Bohemians account as a king as well?
the Bohemians would have been a king, yes. The the Archduke of Austria would have been a king, at least in the context of equivalencies here.
Mhm.
So there were different names for these. Now, the one where this gets interesting is that there are a lot of other titles that are thrown that people also don't seem to know what means. And Viscount is one of them. And Viscount, you just lop it in with the count. But that in doing so, we have to bring up viceroyalty. Uh, go ahead, go ahead and describe viceroyalty a little bit.
So, from my knowledge, and I might not be correct, you might need to correct me, is that you were granted basically the rank of the title that you held, but it was not permitted to be hereditary.
That's pretty much accurate. Um, it would be like me, telling you, "Hey, I'm the king of England, and I want you to, you know, be the Duke of York. But I think your kid's a moron, so he's not inheriting. And whenever you die, I'm getting this title back, and I get to decide who
Mhm.
is going to be the new Duke of York." So essentially, if you had a duchy that was multiple counties, and you had a different count over each of them, it would allow the ruler to appoint that duke from among the counts within that duchy. And in truth, they could have appointed it from somewhere else. These boundaries shifted a great deal over the years.
Yeah, a lot of the granting of titles and the naming of titles is trying not to offend anybody and not step on anybody's toes. That's why the Grand Duchy of Saxony couldn't be a kingdom.
Yes. Uh, the next, because this one is important in the news recently, where you've got like basically the entire royal family of
What?
Britain calling it in because everybody's sick.
Yeah, you cut out. So basically, what?
Uh, the next is regents because basically everybody in the royal family of Britain is sick right now.
Hmm.
And a regent, how a regent is chosen is it varies country to country. Usually, if there is an adult heir, they will serve as the regent in virtually every single case. It would be very improper if,
You
a
sidestep the
sitting
air.
monarch, if you sidestep the heir on this. A regent is the king in everything but name. A regency is what happens whenever you have a monarch who is ill,
Incapable,
batshit,
traveling, currently not of
batshit
age.
crazy. Uh, Looking at you, George the Third. But he gets a bad rap. I like George the Third, the Farmer King. Very well meaning. Uh, Sorry if that's unpatriotic, but like generally, I'm actually, as far as the English monarchs goes, I'm kind of a fan of George the Third. He was very well meaning and like yeah. I want you to think about this, everybody in America. The guy that you call the tyrant was like a king that had his court look down on him because he'd rather go out and hang out with farmers. Yeah, he was a real tyrant, that one.
He just wanted taxes to pay for our defense.
I know. At some point we kind of have to do a video on. Uh, it's kind of funny, but looking at the U.S. in the context of the world when we sort of emerged, we were kind of the spoiled bastards of the world.
Hey guys, we just fought the 7 Years' War for you guys. Maybe you could pay some taxes on stamps. No thanks.
Oh no, it was more than that. Sure, we'll pay tax. Like, hey, look, there's still French here. Will you send people to protect us? Well, that costs money. I'm going to tax you. Is that all right? Yeah, sure. Like, like a few years later, the tea's going in the harbor and everything goes downhill. Americans really don't like taxes.
No.
Right. A really fun one, going back to the royal, well, not royal titles, but noble titles. We've got one more royal title on this, two more royal titles, three more royal titles on the list. Uh, is Marquis. And a Marquis is a very interesting royal title, noble title, excuse me. Um, a Marquis is a March Lord. And you can be forgiven for not knowing what a march is. Uh, a marquis was essentially the answer to martial law within the feudal system. So, for example, whenever England was having, trouble with the Scots to the north, you would have the Scottish marches along that border. And a marquis had a great deal of power legislatively. Um, they weren't fully bound by the same law, any laws that, a king passed. They were basically there to make sure shit didn't hit the fan. And they sort of marched to the beat of their own drummer. They enacted taxes, they enacted laws, and they could pretty much do it with far more. They got a lot more leeway in doing that than, say, someone like even a duke, just because of the circumstances of the area they governed.
Hmm.
And you know, I believe it's Margrave is the term that the Germans have for it. And you actually saw quite a few of those during the First World War,
Yeah.
where they were leaders. And but they had a holding, they had territory that they controlled, and they were part of a nation. But they didn't exactly fall under the same law as the rest of the nation. Now, a prince, obviously the son of a king or an emperor, or their grandson, or their great grandson. It's really kind of interesting. Every single different country just sort of decided how many generations carried, and I think it was the Danish recently changed how long that endured. They shortened it to, I think, 2 generations.
That's no fun.
I'm not, but a prince can also, in some instances, be interchanged with king. Uh, for example, the ruler of a principality that is independent might go by the title of prince.
Would this be a
But
good time to bring up like what the electors were called in the Holy Roman Empire as well?
we will get to that.
Okay.
We will get to that. We're going to talk about the inheritance systems later on, and the whole. You cannot discuss monarchy inheritance systems without discussing the lovely, lovely system of the Holy Roman Empire. The next one on our list is an earl, which for everybody that has ever played Skyrim, if you've ever noticed that Jarl and Earl sound very similar, you're not wrong. Earl was basically a bastardization of Jarl. And it is interchangeable with Count, really. Another one that people often lump into this, but they aren't really the same thing, are knights. A knight was they were essentially given a home, they were given a parcel of land. They might have had a small, very small number of peasants to work that for them. Um, they weren't governing an area, and they would have always been subject to to any of the titles above that we have talked about, really. They are, they don't have that much political power. Their role was almost exclusively in law enforcement and in martial matters. And I'm not sure if the title freeholder is something right to use interchangeably with this. Do you think that one's a fair one?
I've never even heard of that title.
Uh, Freeholder is a term I've heard in association with, you know, the extremely decentralized monarchical systems of Scandinavia, where you have people living in various places you can only get to by boat.
Hmm.
And so you had common folk that held land. So they weren't entirely just commoners. They weren't serfs or anything like that. So they weren't nobility, but they owned land.
Hmm.
So a knight had a title, and it was so it's not quite the same thing. But again, you're not looking at a knight with much political influence unless they have the ear of somebody very.
Well, I think the biggest distinguisher between what you're talking about and what most people think of as a knight is that a knight is a member of the minor nobility. Like they are part of a house or a dynasty that has, their own coat of arms, right?
Yes, they are a dynasty. They are part of a dynasty. Um, Getting into some other somewhat petty nobility, you have manor lords. Um, there are a lot of there have been a lot of manor lords throughout medieval history. Uh, they're somewhat comparable to a baron and somewhat comparable to a knight. Would they have, the ability to assemble a military? Certainly. But their primary role was in rural areas where a lot of their function was much more economical than military, where they were, producing food and things of that nature. And the actually, we've already touched on archdukes, so we don't have to touch on that again. Grand princes and archdukes. But the last one that people hear about a lot, particularly because of the Hundred Years' War, is Dauphin or Dauphin. Not dolphin. It's not frickin' flipper. You have no idea how many times I have heard it called dolphin. The Dolphin of France.
Maybe they just don't like the French.
I don't know. I some I don't know. I really do not know. Dauphin is basically the French term for the crown prince of France. Um, in the same way that the crown prince of England is the Prince of Wales, the crown prince of France was known as the Dauphin, at least starting in like the 1350s, or roughly in that time period. Now, going back to what you were talking about earlier, Colton,
Hmm.
uh, inheritance systems. By all means, please
Well,
have fun explaining the Holy Roman Empire's
actually, first
inheritance
I'm
system.
going to bring up something that we talked about before the show, and since it segues nice with the whole French thing we just talked about. There's a lot of different legal words that basically described if you wanted to get split everything that you owned between all your sons or to give it to one main heir, right? And this was mostly a cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, most of the Latin kind of people, the people that you think of mostly today as like speaking a Latin descended language. That'd be
Yes.
like the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese. They all tended to favor single heirs rather than splitting up their land. Is that mostly correct, right, Robert?
That is true. That is very much the case. The Northern Europeans tended to be much more inclined to say, you know what? I have two sons, just slice it down the middle. And that was kind of the way it worked. And then, they try and kill each other so they could unify everything. A bloody mess.
Yeah.
But yes,
So, and the uh, the Latin way of dealing with extra sons, the heir and the spare, right, was either you send them off to do some clerical stuff with the monks, or you just give them minor land holdings and let them still act like a prince, right? Just never
Yes.
having any responsibility. Um, and then that leads to for for just a simplification of it. I'm going to say the Northern European ways of doing things, which, as Robert said, is you kind of just split it, but that leaves the special case of the Holy Roman Empire, which isn't something that one guy conquered everything and he's like, I am the emperor type deal. It's a conglomeration of a bunch of titles that all of these people are competing interests of one another because they're all just basically like counts and dukes of Germany and northern Italy, right? So the most fair way of deciding who among all of these people gets to be the next emperor after the emperor dies is we have like 50 people, 50 titles, shall I say, and every one of those titles they get to vote. And those titles they were called elector princes of the empire. And that'd be like there was some theocracies in there like what was the big temple? It's in Germany. It's in Cologne or something, right? Or Cologne.
Yes, it's in Colm. I
Yeah.
believe it's in Colm.
Like that guy, that what is his title? I forget.
Bishop,
That I think it's the Grand Bishop or something like that.
Archbishop,
Archbishop. He gets a vote, right? But like so do the Saxons, so do the Bohemians. And not
and
like yeah, go ahead.
also of interest in this is that looking back at the going back to I think it was the King George III thing from earlier,
Mhm.
he also held land in Hanover, and Hanover was a vote. So
Yeah.
even though he was the King of England, he got a vote in who was going to be the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, that and there's a bunch of stuff like that where like, different areas are obviously subject to different laws. Like, if somebody owns a house in California versus owns a house in, North Carolina, you pay taxes on both and they're subject to different levels of taxes. Everybody can get that and they understand that. And that's also true of royal titles. So, and they have different rights and responsibilities alongside those titles. But and then all of that combined together, once the elector princes reached a consensus and chose somebody, then the pope could just be like, I'm not going to crown that guy emperor. I don't like
Yeah, pretty
him.
much. Uh,
Usually they did though, because you don't want to start an anti-pope war, which is a whole nother set of things that's funny about the medieval ages.
yeah, how? So sometimes you had to wonder which pope was the real pope because the Germans were like, "Nope, this is our guy,
Well, and sometimes the French were like, we're going to make our own pope, and I always tend to prefer the pope in Avignon. That's my pope.
the Pope in Avignon."
Yeah.
Yes. Oh Lord. So we've covered, the early Germanic system where things were just split between sons. The Holy Roman Empire's glorious elector system. And it's worth noting that not every single title got a vote.
No,
Not even
only
every
important
single,
ones.
not even every single independent title. Like as an independent vassal reporting directly to the emperor, there was a monastery in that was like it still exists, and it's like on 3 acres of land, and that was its own. They like everything was just imagine taking a map of Germany and then it's made entirely of glass, beating the hell out of it with a hammer, and that's kind of what the Holy Roman Empire's map looked like. Um, and we've also covered the more traditional hereditary monarchy that most people think of. But it's important to throw in that while people thought Rome fell, half of it was still ongoing. If you ask the Byzantines, uh, you know, what kind of culture they were, they would say they were Romans. And they continued saying that until the 1400s.
There were some people that still continued saying that until the 1900s.
That's not surprising. Uh, but the Byzantines also had sort of their own unique system. Go ahead and go into that one.
So, all right, imagine a system where we talked a little about Imperial China, right? How there's a bunch of bureaucrats. Now, let's add a little bit of the Western flavor to that, where most of the people that can go and be literate and become those bureaucrats are from important families. So there's already a little bit of hereditary line there, right? And then the vice royalty stuff that we talked about earlier, those were governorships, and they ruled over territory, right?
Yeah,
And you could be replaced and moved around at whim. So generally, your seat of power wherever you were wasn't somewhere that had like loyalty to you or to your family. So a lot of stuff was based off of reputation. Like if your family had someone in there that was a general in the army and like, they were a pretty good general, like they, beat up Bulgarians a couple times, that's a really good thing, right?
yeah,
So all of this stuff where you try to extract as much wealth as you can from your governorship while also not completely screwing over the peasants, and doing the traditional Roman games, right? It
yes,
is this weird amalgamation of medieval, classical, and then imperial hegemony. And then suddenly you think that it's an empire. Like the emperor is usually someone, for the most part, descended from someone else. But you also have really traitorous imperial guards and frequent civil wars. So it's not as if that was a safe bet. And even and if you were a general and your soldiers declared you to be the next emperor because you just won a great battle against the Bulgarians or the Turks, if you declined to become emperor, then your soldiers would kill you. So you kind of just had to go with it. And it's this weird scenario all the time of like anybody could become the next emperor. Like Basil the First, I think it was. He was a
Basil
peasant.
the First.
He was a peasant, not even of nobility. I don't even know if he was literate. He might not have been. He was a great general. He worked his way up through the imperial army to become a general, and his people were like, "So you're going to be the emperor, right?" And he went, "Maybe in a little bit. Like, don't kill me yet." And he had to work his way towards the current emperor and like marry his daughter, right? Some like now it's weird dynastic stuff like a traditional monarchy. And then his son was going to be the next emperor, and his soldiers were like cool with that. And then
Yeah,
someone killed the current emperor, and everyone was like, "Who's this kid? We're not going to be ruled by a kid emperor. It's obviously Basil, right?"
yeah. Uh,
It's crazy.
but yeah. And to, and what's really impressive is that Basil was so successful that in the same way that the emperor in Rome was called Caesar, the title for the emperor of the Byzantines became known as Basilius. He was just a peasant. So there
I,
was
I
definitely.
I think that's a little bit incorrect. That's just a little bit
I,
incorrect.
I'm almost positive that it was named after Basil the First.
I don't. I think that's just the Greek word for like emperor or like king. I'm pretty sure.
Give me a second.
I don't want to shit on your parade though.
Uh, Give me a second. I actually want to look into this.
But yeah, and also I may or may not be amalgamating different people into one Basil the First, but like that story in general did happen. Might not have been him. Might have been someone else. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's actually it is Basil the First. Give me a second. Yes, it was. You are correct. It was derived from the pre-Hellenic word for king.
Woo!
You got me on that one.
That would have been funny though.
I would have sworn that that was why they did it. I thought they reverted it from Caesar to Basilius because of Basil.
Well, there's actually an interesting point though on Caesar is that Caesar became a title that you could hold, like an office, during the
Yeah.
Byzantine times, where it was basically like it was kind of like you're the heir, not really. You're the co-emperor because they kind of kept that thing around from like the 200s. Who's the guy that fucking made the empire like split into four? Who's that guy?
Oh, I,
Diocletian?
I thought that was after Diocletian.
I don't
I
know. It
can't
might have been
remember.
Diocletian. I don't. Anyways, the point being though is that they still had that system around, but it was like entirely ceremonial at that point, and you would just call
It
like,
was Diocletian. It was Diocletian.
oh, another point for me.
No, I'm coming up short today.
I just remember Diocletian because he wanted to go back to his cabbage farms constantly,
I
and
know.
and they're like, just be the emperor or we'll kill you.
Yeah, you can still go to his palace. It still stands.
Ooh,
It's it's lovely. It's in the Yugo zone, so beware.
that's a beautiful place. We can all go there and have
Gotta love the
rakia.
Balkans. Yes.
Let's go there and have rakia.
Gotta love the Balkans, man.
I'm sure it's nice if you're not Balkan. You
I'm
know,
sure
you're
it
not. You
is.
don't have to get involved in the local culture problems.
Yes. All right. So some other lovely ways in which, a monarch could be chosen was following the Magna Carta in England. You had this lovely little organization, the House of Lords, become a thing. Oh
Hate them.
boy,
Hate them.
the mo- the most boring of political houses. At least the House of Commons will beat the shit out of each other, but the House of Lords, eh.
They just need to
Well,
put away their top hats and collect taxes.
exactly.
Go back to being irrelevant nobility.
So the House of Lords, for a long time period, in the event that there was no legitimate heir, no obvious heir would be able to vote to declare somebody a king. Most notably, at least in my eyes, was when before Mary, Queen of Scots, became the Queen of England. There was a bit of a time period where they weren't sure who was going to be the next ruler. And they nominated a woman by the name of Lady Jane Grey, um, because she was related to the appropriate people. And she ruled for a whopping 7 days, excuse me, nine, before Mary showed up, said, "Nope, I'm queen now." Locked Jane in the tower, became queen. So the important thing to remember is that your ability to enforce who was going to be monarch largely came down to the size of your army.
That's right.
And then, just because it's too humorous to not list it, is outsourced monarchies. Looking at you, Poland.
Was that just Poland, or was that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth?
I think it was just Poland,
Mm.
where it's like we don't have an heir, so we're going to put out bids for a monarch. I can't remember his name, but it's how you wound up with a Jewish king of Poland.
Well, America almost did that too.
We almost
After we
out.
won the Revolutionary War, we were like, so we gotta have a good monarch, right? And everyone was kind of debating on it, and we actually asked one of the princes of Hohenzollern, which was the Prussian royal family at the time. But eventually, we decided, never mind.
Yeah, like we had really good relationships with the Prussians whenever the U.S. first became a thing.
Actually, also notably, I don't know if it was through direct inheritance. I think it was outsourced monarchy as well. But Maximilian the First of Mexico as well, right?
He was forcibly imported
Yep.
by
I forget. I forget. He was a Habsburg, right?
I believe so. I believe he was related to the Habsburgs.
He went out like a boss. If any of you have the time to read about Maximilian the First, he like totally embraced like being the Mexican king or emperor, whatever it was.
Yeah,
Look him up. He sad way to go though.
fun guy to party with.
Oh, I bet.
But moving on, you've got a very, very long of monarchical government. What do you think are the origins of that?
I think it is just human nature because at one point, some family decided to plant a lot of wheat, and then they put walls around it, and other people started living around them to ask for wheat. And eventually that guy was like, I control all the food, therefore you should pay me taxes.
Uh, I see it in much the same way. Maybe not necessarily with like wheat farms, because you saw stuff like this emerge out of even nomadic peoples where they hadn't figured out wheat farming yet, or any kind of farming really. They just
I have the biggest herd.
move. I have the biggest herd. Look at the size of my herd. But yeah, like it seems to be something that emerged very much from just basic human nature. Just because it appeared so many places. Uh, you know, Egypt, the pharaoh system, essentially a monarch. Uh, India, quite some distance away, monarchy. Before Islam, the Persians, it was a slightly different system. I don't remember what it's called. Essentially monarchy. Japan shogunate, essentially monarchy. Look at the New World, the groups that were advanced enough to actually set up a stable society. What was it? Essentially a monarchy was what they were veering toward. And even like you could make a case that the Iroquois had advanced enough where they had their own legal doctrine as well as the Cherokee. But I mean, then look down at the Mayans and the Incans and the Aztecs, and it's something that very much falls into the same family at least as monarchies. Now, one area where you know people don't really think of much with monarchy is the fact that they actually had legislation.
You cut out, Robert. What did you say? They
Oh,
actually had legislative what?
they actually have legislation. Like there was a legislative process. The concept of a monarch having unlimited power, it's kind of funny. People seem to view that, the late stage French monarchs as being just the norm for how monarchy functioned, which is not the case. And, going back to the Northern European, Southern European divide, that same pattern of centralization
Mhm.
really shows itself here. Your Northern European monarchy, the British, the Dutch, the Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, were very, very decentralized. The king or queen did not have unlimited power. If they wanted to pass laws, they sure as hell needed to consult with not only their lords, because, if you had a few powerful lords that did not like it, they were going to declare war on you. But also because they lacked the ability to really enforce it. If anybody has been to, specifically Norway is a good example with this, where you've got towns that are dotted up and down the coast. You're getting there by ship. You don't really have the means of going and enforcing excessive rules on these places. So a lot of that legislation was instead, you know, the local count could do it or a local duke could do it. And it generally prevented a lot of problems you saw, like in late stage France. I like that. That's a good condition, late stage France. It's kind of like cancer.
I diagnosed you with a late stage France. Unfortunately, it's terminal.
Yeah. Whereas whenever you went south, that's where you started to see much uh, more absolute monarchies, where you had more of the Latin in. And one of the things that's very interesting in this is that you can sort of tell these countries apart based on which side they took in the Reformation.
Hmm.
It's actually kind of funny, uh, just because if a nation really went hard, any Protestant or anything not Catholic, it's pretty much guaranteed that their monarchy was fairly decentralized. Now, one of the things that has to be pointed out in all of this, before we go into the next topic, is the naming of kingdoms. And these tend to be named along ethnic lines. For example, England, or Angland as it was known, would be the land of the Angles. Denmark, the land of the Danes. Norway, the land of the Norse. Sweden, or Sweden, the land of the Sphere. I might be mispronouncing that. I think it's the Sphere. Uh, Poland, the land of the Poles. And before it was, well, after it was called Italy and before it was called Italy again, what was Colton?
I didn't hear you at all. You cut out.
Oh, before, after Italy was known as Italy and before it was known as Italy again, what was
Um, I'm not sure what you're getting at here.
Lombardy, the land of the Lombards?
Ah,
Uh, I Most of these nations that emerged during this time emerged as essentially an ethnos, just because of proximity, and that's where they were. Obviously, the Angles weren't originally from England, and the Lombards weren't originally from Italy, and the Franks weren't originally from France. In fact, most of these purple weren't really where they, had come from. But that's why I find the migratory period interesting. But it sort of shows it's important just for the evolution of governments to see how these blocks emerged and how they were generally nations of one peoples. So moving the step up from this, how would you define imperialism?
I would say that's when a monarch or a nation would extend beyond its original, you know, accepted ethnicities of where it's locally from.
Yes, I would go so far as to also add as extending beyond logical borders. So for example, I would not say the English taking Wales or Scotland. I don't view that as being something where that was imperialistic. That was, consolidating a defensive position.
Hmm.
Taking Ireland, maybe not necessary. But the thing is, there are a lot of cases where countries in Europe extended well beyond their cultural boundaries. And the French are probably one of the best examples again. The French are Franks. They were Germans who I guess were Romophiles and decided, they skipped the whole, Arianism thing and decided they were going to be Catholic. But so basically a German people, but then they ate Aquitaine, which was home to the Occitans, which were another a mix of another German people and some Celtic. And then they ate Brittany, which was basically just Celtic. And then they ate Burgundy later on, following the succession.
What are the people in like Belgium called? Like Wallonie or something like that?
Yes, Walloons, French-speaking Belgians, I believe it is.
Mm.
That's actually a fun one. Um, and this has actually been a hilarious political debate going on in Britain. Oh God! For some reason, the Welsh are sort of pissed off because I
The
mean the Welsh
Welsh?
are always yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the Welsh are always pissed off. I mean they've been being pissed on by everybody for years. I mean that's part of Welsh culture. You're just standing there and taking it from whoever's there. But anyway, the Welsh have been well. You've had a movement in Wales to see the country's name change because for some reason they believe that the name of that country was based upon the early Anglo word for slave. And the reality of it is honestly one of the funniest things imaginable. You see, frequently you'll see in a lot of media, people of an Asian background tend to have some trouble with R's and L's. I'm not sure if you've ever seen Christmas Story, Colton, but going to the Chinese restaurant for Christmas dinner and having Asian people screw that up whenever they're singing Deck the Halls. It's glorious.
No, I've unfortunately
But
not seen it.
you, good Lord, what am I going to do with you, Colton? Anyway, those kinds of difficulties with pronunciations of certain sounds are real for a lot of people. And the Germans were no different. The W for W and G as in G were sounds that the Germans had a lot of difficulty with. So Wales was actually just how the Germans pronounced Gales, like Gaelic people. And so it's just a early Germanization of what they were calling themselves. It has nothing to do with them being called slaves. But I've gotten a huge kick out of reading article upon article about that and how this is oppressive. And it's like, no, this is just, how Germans pronounce things. And the Walloons, for example, were a case of what they were calling the Celtic people in the area, as opposed to Galoon or whatever they were calling themselves, presumably. They changed that G for a W, and that was how it went. This is why I love the migratory period. It's so fun. You have a
That just
but
sounds I mean, I guess you can't really do much when, the people that are your overlords just keep mispronouncing your name until it becomes the standard name.
Yep. It is literally a case of there are 1,000 people in this country mispronouncing your name, and all 10 of you that are pronouncing it correctly just sort of get overpowered. Just the way it works. But yeah, so imperialism generally, I agree with you. It Going back to that, it's when a nation expands beyond its logical cultural borders. So next up, why do you think that monarchy is so fascinating to people in the Western world in modern times?
Well,
Like we see it in so many forms of media.
there's a sense of romance to it, is there not?
There is.
I think that's definitely, a kind of thing. Maybe there's a little bit of idealism there as well, where the kind of the feeling that everything is so screwed up, if just one person could come and just fix it all, right? That kind of like idealism. And then
Yeah.
maybe also just like a fondness for the past, like a nostalgia for a place you never were, right?
Yeah. I think some I think a lot of it goes back to how it's presented in pop culture
Mhm.
because, everything you see about it is all, fantasy or video games and it's all fun. And I think that's part of the fascination. And I think that's kind of a shame because I think it's caused people to sort of like there is so much interesting there and there is so much that could be done with it. But instead, they sort of it's led people to dumb it down into something that it wasn't.
Mhm.
When in reality, you know, fantasy literature, anything like that, could benefit a great deal just from presenting it as it was, just because there's so much there to work with for, storytelling. Uh, so going into that, why do you think that nobody actually teaches how monarchy works anymore, considering how influential it was to basically every single damn Western nation? Hell, most of the Eastern ones too. Basically every nation, all the nations that had progressed really beyond a hunter-gatherer stage.
Well, I think a lot of it nowadays is there's a whether it's historical revisionism or downright hostility towards, the histories of our nations nowadays. I think that's a lot of what's going on, right? I think there's
Yeah,
this really just this general idea of anything before World War II is bad, and we were all just living in evil and sin and oppressing everybody. I think that's a pretty widely held historical, you know, view.
yeah. I never understood that because I mean I've always been of the opinion that if you don't know what you came from, you don't know where you're going.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of monarchy taught a lot of lessons about government, about politics, about running a country. And so we've just thrown all of those away now. We've been like, nope, nope, scratch this. When in reality, that was basically the testing ground for more than 1,000 years.
Actually, I think I have another point I'd like to add on.
Sure.
I don't know if this is only monarchy, but I think it's definitely prevailing throughout a lot of human history. Is this kind of tendency to infantilize our ancestors, and say that, oh, we're better now, we know better, kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah. I get the feeling that a lot of people that have that sentiment very much look back on things as being a case where the same I don't know, sense of morality or social consciousness was prevalent during these different times when it was not. Uh, like this was a vastly different landscape economically, politically, socially. Um, I mean, it could be argued that, I mean, mankind is only building, you know, trying to build nations, which are something very complex and multifaceted for a few thousand years. And some of them quite a bit less than that. And so we're still very much, taking baby steps.
Hmm.
And it just seems like people don't appreciate that the world was a very, very different place during these times. Uh, you know, right now you can go to if you're in the US, you can go to a grocery store and by God, there's going to be food on those shelves. But that's not something everybody in history was able to take so much for granted. Um, there was a lot more of a survival element to things throughout much of history. And so pragmatic decisions had to be made. Um,
Not even back then, not even, like local safety was guaranteed. That, you know, nowadays obviously we have cameras everywhere, fingerprints, DNA, everything that can be traced, right? Back then, if you committed a crime and snuck out into the woods, there's a good chance that if you weren't caught doing it then, you wouldn't be caught.
somebody would probably be blamed with it,
Somebody would,
just for the sake of like
upholding,
eh,
yeah.
some semblance of like making people feel secure so that you wouldn't have a riot because even more people would have died.
Hmm.
Uh, that's just the nature of it. I mean, if you want to look at safety, look at the Viking. You've got Lindisfarne just sitting there. It's scary. Well, not anymore. And all of a sudden, the monks get their they lose some of their dangly bits and get you know sold off into Constantinople. Because yes, the original European slave route was down through the rivers in modern day Russia by the Scandinavians. Because it was amazing how much the Byzantines would buy a literate person for. It wasn't just the gold they were after.
You can read Latin, you're in.
You can read Latin. We're going to take you on a long vacation. So next up, why do you think it is that so many games, books, and the like are set in worlds where monarchy is the norm?
Well, obviously, it's a rich setting, right? And kind of the things that we just talked about where safety isn't guaranteed, so it kind of you can appeal to people's sense of heroism, right?
You can. I get it.
Also along those lines is it gives a little bit more prestige to interacting with important people because there's not really, a prestige nowadays of, oh, I talked to a local bureaucrat, you know. But if you're talking to the count of an area, they're royalty, right? Or their nobility at least.
Yeah. I mean, Lord, we've talked to God knows how many elected officials, and it's like, oh, you.
Yeah, at first, I'll admit in the very beginning, I was like, "Ooh, I'm meeting someone special," and then it very quickly is like, "Oh, you're just a normal person," which I'm sure is the same of anybody that met nobility in the past, right? But there's a
Yeah.
sense of grandeur there.
Yeah. It still has that. Yeah, the sense of grandeur, I think, is a good way of putting it. And personally, I think it's just at this point, it goes back to Arthurian legend. I think that's really the source. I mean, what was it? Even during the medieval period, you had people fascinated with Arthurian legend. I can't remember the name of the specific lord, but he looked at, the tales that were told about, Arthur, the king of the Britons, and decided to build essentially fairy tale castles. Now, none of these are still standing. They were very poorly built. Apparently very pretty at the time, but not at all functional. But I think that the concept of the goodly king has been something that has endured in the human consciousness for a very long.
Hmm.
Now, speaking of long time, why do you think it is that monarchy lasted? Because it was basically, certainly you had merchant republics that emerged, and they were certainly successful. Venice, Genoa, Lord,
Pisa.
there, yes, Pisa. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, Pisa even now has the standing continuous government because their government is still directly descended from the Roman Empire, if I'm not mistaken.
That's pretty badass.
Pretty awesome. But I believe, like anything that's been changed has just been done legislatively through the years from the Roman days. I think they are the last real descendants politically of the Roman Empire. Uh, but yeah, why did monarchy last so long?
Well, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, so excuse me and put on your thinking caps. But I think it is an inherently stable system. So, in contrast with monarchy, you have the modern, people that hold office, usually for only a set period of time, not for life, and it's not hereditary, right?
Yes,
So those people are incentivized by, not being able to work another job because they are holding office for maybe 10, 20 years, that they're going to extract as much wealth as they can out of the system that they are holding office in.
yes,
Meanwhile, in a monarchy, the holdings of the royal or the nobility, they are their own personal holdings. That entire area is your investment, is your retirement, and is your kid's livelihood. So it's in your best interest to not extract all that wealth from it and to instead invest further into it so you can pass it down and ensure that you have enough money to live and your children have enough money to live and so on, right? Through the generations. I think that is
wealth
an inherently
cultivation.
terrible.
Yeah, wealth cultivation, like starting a business.
Mhm.
And yeah, I agree with that. I mean, people always cite all of the very bad monarchs and nobles, and certainly there were quite a few who were less than you
Less
know
than scrupulous.
very much less than scrupulous. But that being said, um, a lot of them were very good, and the reason they were very good
You
was
keep cutting out on the
because
word good.
well, the reason they were very good was because first off, you would have had civil wars.
Mhm.
You would have had a great deal more violence than you actually. It's important to remember that a lot of the conflicts during this period, for example, if you were the King of England and you had a buddy who was, I don't know, the Duke of York and I don't know, what is it, the Duchy of Lancaster?
Sure.
Sure. and they were, next to each other, they might go to war with each other, even though they're both your vassals, because they're bickering over who's the rightful of another piece of land. And so that certainly there would be, fighting there. But you didn't really see too terribly many peasant uprisings, which, if they had actually done it, if there had been a large number, especially with the advent of the longbow later on, you would have seen the monarchy pretty quickly taken down.
And that's another thing that kind of, represents accountability is that, with someone holding office in an elected system, you can kind of blame the last guy that was in your shoes and say you're trying to fix it all. Like that's pretty common in American politics, right?
Yeah.
But you know, you're not really in charge in a monarchy system until the last guy dies. And in that case, that guy was your dad, usually, or your brother or something. And all the blame is on you and your family. So you guys, if there was a peasant rebellion, they knew exactly who they're going for, and they know exactly where you live because you live in a big stone building that doesn't have a grass roof.
Yes. Um, but that's absolutely true. The you know who to blame if shit goes wrong in a monarchy, and there's no getting out of that. But the other factor, part of why I believe it endured so long, is that of every single form of government, monarchy has done the best job of resolving the rural and urban divide.
Hmm.
I mean, right now, if you follow American politics, you can pretty much determine, which counties are going, red or blue based upon whether they're urban or rural, with the suburban being the fluctuating bit.
Hmm.
And this has been a problem that has existed for thousands of years. Rural people have vastly different needs from a government than urban people. They're just distinctly different. And with how decentralized monarchy actually is, just because that king can't micromanage an entire nation, they're going to have somebody, they're going to send a baron to podunk nowhere to oversee the frickin' flax fields. And this guy is incentivized both by his boss to make sure flax keeps being produced, and by the locals to not, you know, piss them off too much to where they get those torches and pitchforks.
And on top of that, he can't if they're producing, a valuable resource like that and not essentially just food, right? He can't scrape any money out of the system because he needs to make sure people are fed. Otherwise, again, pitchfork time.
Pitchfork time. Which is certainly, there have been pitchfork times. What is it? John the First? Pitchfork time. Though I will commit the ultimate sin in the eyes of a lot of Anglophiles and say that Richard the Lionhearted, not as much as he was cracked out. He's not that great.
Well, he was too busy, fighting foreign wars and leaving England to be led by a regent.
Kind of. And, bankrupt, having his mother bankrupt the nation to pay for his ransom because he was captured in Italy, I think.
How many times did he have to be ransomed? Was it like 3 times?
Twice, I think.
Ugh. And literally a king's ransom. There's a reason that that's a saying, you know?
Yes, it bankrupts a country. But yeah. So there is a reason why monarchy lasted as long as it did. And honestly, look looking back, even though we demonize it a lot now, considering what it wasn't a bad system. Like it had a lot of benefits. Uh Certainly upward mobility was limited, but in a day and age when, getting to, be alive the next day was not something a lot of the world could really take for granted, it actually did that pretty well. It actually did that pretty well. So, just for fun here at the end of all of the events and political issues during the feudal period, are there any that stand out to you as being, out there and kind of fun from a historical standpoint?
Well, there's one that's often kind of joked about, and those are the multiple defenestrations of Prague.
Mm,
During their council meetings, some people got thrown out of windows.
that's not really surprising. Uh, was this what period in Prague?
I think that it was like it happened multiple times, which is funny. But I think it's like 1400s to like mid 1500s around that time. Might be earlier, might be later, but I think that's pretty funny.
I'll throw out one quick.
All right.
So back when the bubonic plague was a thing
Mm-hmm.
and sweeping across Europe, a lot of people died. And so you had people that had been like distantly related to these petty lords, just having the entire rest of their family die. And all of a sudden, they were, thrown back into a seat. They had no expectation. They could have had no reasonable expectation of ever having had. And so you also had, a lot of commoners where a lot of people died and they inherited whatever money their entire family. And so you have a lot of petty nobles and a lot of essentially peasants who were financially elevated above what they were educated to really be able to handle and how to handle responsibly. And so you wound up with a bunch of petty lords and a proto accidentally emerging merchant class that really had no idea what to do, but viewed themselves as essentially having become nobility by virtue of this. In some cases, actually, they had. But they emerged to that level, and then they're like, well, what do we do now? And the perception of nobility at the time, like these people were very far removed from it. Your average person didn't really have a solid understanding of how the government functioned. And so they just decided that they were going to do what they thought that the nobility did, which, according to many accounts, wild orgies. Turns out, bubonic plague, sexually transmitted disease.
Yeah.
So apparently, these groups just wound up keeping on killing themselves. And it was just delightful.
Yeah.
Um,
The boils there. Ugh.
I know, man, I know. But before those boils emerge, you don't know. It's just like, well, we're going to have fun while we can. We're going to live like the nobility. So as opposed to, hawking their daughter off to a foreign country and, you know, having to budget for a nation and the kinds of things that, a monarch would have actually had to do. That's what the common folk at the time period thought that the ruling class did,
Right.
drinking and whoring.
I mean, maybe some of the burgers did that, Probably not the actual, people in charge of things.
Yeah. Um, Another one that I always found funny from the time period is the whole period shortly after Charlemagne, where they were trying to determine who had authority over who. Was the church the power over the empire, or the empire the power over the church? And I mean, one that everybody's probably heard is the Bucket War,
Oh yeah.
and where you had a essentially a county in Italy declaring war on another county in Italy, and at this point in time, yeah, the Lombard, this would have been Italy again by then. It would have just become Italy again by then. Um, but you would have had essentially one Italian county declaring war because one side thought the emperor had more authority than the church, and the other side thought the church had more authority. And you had all kinds of stupid bullshit reasons where these counties, just by popular demand, were going to war with the other. Just because, essentially some burger decided, well, not necessarily even the official, but the common folk wanted to have their say in the matter. They just wanted to go beat the shit out of the other guy with sticks. That was a fun one.
Was
And
was the story with that is that they were deciding whoever won is whoever got the bucket back?
uh something like I don't like the whole bucket thing was basically just an excuse to go beat the shit out of each other. Like there were so many minor conflicts, and not even like what was funny was that it wasn't even all of them being lords. Some of them you were just, people that were very, very pious being pissed off that somebody would think they would be above the Pope and wanting to go beat the shit out of them. Like it was glorious. But that was a very interesting bit in it. And all in all, just for the sake of comparison, the US, we've had about 200 years of elected rule, and we're nearing about 1,000 years of the current situation for like the British monarchy. Ruler for ruler, how do you think, the American presidency has compared as far as quality of leadership with the British monarchy over the years?
I will admit,
Up
I'm.
until
Oh god.
the point where the British monarchy really lost any meaningful authority.
So I'm going to
So up
admit that I'm not the most informed on the British monarchy and like what they've done, right? But I will say that a lot of American presidents are probably taking credit for a lot of stuff that was going to happen anyways, because America is very blessed in terms of the land that we're on, you know? Like just the amount of resources, the neighbors that we have, right?
Yeah,
So unless like you really did something crazy or you did something super notable legislatively or like started a great project or something. Most American presidents are just kind of coasting on the fact that we have a shit ton of undeveloped land still, and that's just there's always room for more economic activity, you know?
Yeah. All in all, whenever in looking at something like this, I have to look at, effectual leaders.
Mhm.
And the US has not had many effectual presidents. They might have done things, they might have passed some legislation, but most of them have not done things that stand the test of time, where it's something where they did ABC, this lasted for 100 years, and you know, they left a meaningful, positive, perpetual good impact.
Mhm.
And as far as overall quality of leaders, it's weird to say this as an American, but you had a lot of surprisingly good monarchs. Like, we may not like them given, the standards by which people are looked at today, but when looking at them in the context of the time they lived in, they were damn effective. I mean, one of the ones that a lot of people shit on a lot, for example, is Edward the First, because Braveheart.
Mhm.
But I mean, so admittedly, he was no great fan of the Scots. But what a lot of people have long failed to realize regarding him was that England, and well, people know the English and the French never really, them actually working together is kind of a recent phenomena. But you know who did work well with the French for a very long time?
Was
The
it him?
Scots.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Scots. So yeah, the English having a problem with Scotland on their border and wanting that resolved, giving threat of France, was a perfectly logical and reasonable thing for the time. And, you know, looking back at it, like at all the stories that, people write or games that people create that center on this stuff, I think that's an area that's really underused, in that people tend to focus on good versus evil, as opposed to, look, I'm just doing the best I can with the situation provided.
Yeah, and we just have, yeah,
And
opposing kind of end goals.
you have end goals that, where it's not like either party in this is inherently bad. It's just that, you know, my security is here, and I can't have that security with you playing nice with them. Therefore, I need to get rid of. Where it's something where I can't trust, like party A can't trust party C, and party B works with party C. So party A undermines party B.
Mhm.
And these are the kinds of things where I think they not only reflect that time period very, very well, they give meaning, uh, they give perspective into what the kinds of troubles you would have during that time. Because I've always felt like fantasy was missing out because oh, you're going to go and kill a dragon, but they never seem to focus on the kinds of things that just people would do in that kind of setting. And you can make it fantastical. But it seems like that's something where that's very underexploited. And I would like to think there are people out there who would appreciate that kind of thing being incorporated into games and entertainment and movies.
Hmm.
Just because that system, just because monarchy itself is so family based, it is so like you're not making like your relationship with France isn't about some long history if you're the king of England. It's how much you actually king of like
It's how much
do you
what?
know this guy? Like like diplomacy isn't, this nation and all of its apparatuses and your nation and all of your apparatuses coordinating together.
Hmm.
It's, you as the monarch meeting another country's monarch, and do you get along? It, do you feel like you can trust them?
Yeah.
And that's something that, is I don't think really presented all that well in modern fiction. And I think it's something that could be very much exploited to make something very entertaining. Just because, it could be gut wrenching. Uh, what was it? As soon as William the Conqueror conquered England, how long was it before you had the first suspected case of what is it? Kinslaying.
Hmm.
H- how many monarchs after William the First do you think it was before kinslaying offhand?
Did you say king slang or kin slang?
Kinslaying, where somebody killed a family member or
Um,
was suspected to have killed somebody.
you said how many before?
After William the First,
Yeah.
how many monarchs do you think it was before a family member was suspected of killing another family member to ascend to the throne?
I'm gonna guess zero, just because that's an interesting answer.
That is correct. William the Second inherited, and then Henry inherited, and William the Second was killed while out hunting. There's actually a marker. There's a stone where he was shot and killed while he was out. It's called the Rufus Stone.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was broadly suspected that it was labeled as a hunting accident because there was never proof. But his brother was suspected. Uh, his brother Henry was suspected of making that happen. Like he didn't rule very long at all.
That's gotta suck. I can't
Like
imagine
that.
that.
Yeah. It's like these are the kinds of things that can make a story very. And I do wish more rate it. But yeah, that being said, I think we've said pretty much all we have to say on this. So, to you poor bastards still listening, thank you for doing so. We appreciate it. And we look forward to hopefully entertaining you again next week. Thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Have a good one, folks.
Take care.